Joining us today on VLGA Connect, I'm very pleased to have with us Stan Krpan, who's normally the CEO of Solar Victoria, but at the moment is a co-chair of Victoria's Building Recovery Taskforce. Stan, busy times for you. Welcome to the program.
Well, good morning, Chris. Great to be here.
Firstly, tell us a bit about how the Taskforce came about and how that's impacted upon your role at Solar Victoria.
Yeah, so the Building Victoria's Recovery Taskforce was commissioned by the Minister for Planning and the Treasurer of Victoria. And that happened in early April. We've been asked to serve, so it's myself, Jude Munro, who will be known to many of your viewers, is the chair of the Victorian Planning Authority, and also Roger Teal, who's a former president of the Victorian Property Council, but also a former executive at Lend Lease. And so essentially we've been asked to look at a few different things. One of them is to fast track applications through the planning process, appropriate applications that are shovel ready, really as part of the economic recovery of Victoria and economic stimulus. Second piece is around economic stimulus and advising the government, particularly from a building and construction sector, and again with that sort of planning lens to look at opportunities for economic stimulus. Very interested in affordable and social housing as well, which is referred to in our terms of reference. And then the third piece is really about longer term reform, and again, predominantly around planning and also precincts. And for me, what that's meant is that in early April, I took a leave of absence from Solar Victoria. I'm the CEO of Solar Victoria and have been for over a year now. And our Executive Director, Lynn Bowring, is now leading Solar Vic for this initial period while I'm on the task force. It is a full-time gig.
It strikes me that you bring a fairly unique blend of experience, previously Sustainability Victoria, as you've said, Solar Victoria for a while, and your experience around the public sector generally. Can you tell us a bit about how that experience is helping you navigate what is a pretty interesting time at the moment with your task force duties?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Look, I've been really fortunate in the public sector to have had a diverse career, as you say, working in regulators predominantly from a health and safety and environment regulatory perspective, but also at Sustainability Victoria, where I was for 8 years and very much focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy and waste and recycling and emissions reduction. But in 2017, I also worked for the Minister for Planning on the Victorian Planning Task Force with Ted Baillieu and John Thwaites. And so the combination of both a regulatory perspective, but also understanding the building and construction sector, as well as my sustainability background, kind of meet the terms of reference. So that the terms of reference require us to have regard in all of those things that I mentioned around stimulus and reform, to look at the opportunities to tick off on some of the government's other agendas. And of course, environmental sustainability and a whole social agenda part of the government's agenda. We're specifically asked to look at opportunities for emissions reduction. So I think, that diversity of my background really meets some of those terms of reference, but predominantly throughout my career, I've been really interested in reform, and I've been very fortunate to have been a part of spearheading some of those government reforms. And so that combination seems to really work.
So our audience is largely local government, not exclusively, but largely. How do you see the work of the task force intersecting with councils at this particular time?
Yeah, look, local government has a critically important role in all of those matters that I've talked about, building and construction, in terms of new development, in terms of precincts, but particularly around planning, which is a very strong lens on our terms of reference and the purpose that we were set up for. I think local government is very much part of, it's a complex system, but part of the custodians of, the public realm and through the planning system in particular. And of course, the minister and the state government have a role. It's a shared accountability. But I think that critical, important role, that local engagement of community, the local engagement and vision setting around place, around the public realm, around good design, and obviously strategic as well as statutory planning is a critical role for local government. So we've been engaging very broadly across a whole range of sectors, but particularly with local government at CEO level and also through the association to make sure that view is heard.
Stan, you mentioned affordable housing and social housing there before. That's been a critical issue for quite some time. And I know councils have been challenged for a long time too about what their role is in this space and how they can make some sort of meaningful difference there. Is this a real opportunity, do you think, to finally crack that nut, so to speak, in terms of how we deal with that issue?
Yeah, look, I do think the circumstances are unique. Obviously, we're in a very difficult economic situation, and we're still seeing that play out. I think it'll play out definitely over the next year. And I think the focus on affordable and social housing, but social housing in particular, where there is such a gap between the level of social housing that's available in Victoria now versus the demand and the need, and where the national average is, creates this fantastic opportunity for the opportunity around stimulus and investment in particular because of that sort of social agenda, but also in terms of the role of local government is how do we actually expedite some of these projects? So there's some fantastic ideas there. There's some shovel ready, and that's a term I know some people cringe at, but they are shovel ready. They're ready to go. The procurements are ready to go. We've heard some great leadership from across the community housing sector, for instance, and indeed from the Director of Housing, that they are, sort of ready to step up to that responsibility. But there are things that get in the way. Planning is one of those. And I think for local governments, it is a challenge, that local engagement around planning proposals, where there is, for some social housing projects, a stigma still, where it's a very difficult terrain to navigate for local government. It's a difficult terrain at the best of times to navigate complex, big planning decisions, particularly in middle ring suburbs where it's a contested space. And I think we've seen some great leadership from local government, particularly in the regional cities who we met with last week, who are also interested in playing their part. They know the demand is there, and they know that this is an opportunity, effectively a counter-cyclical opportunity to invest in social housing. So we're really keen to hear those views from local government and work with them on projects that might be able to be fast-tracked.
Stan, I'm personally involved in some of the work that's going into at least one of two city deals that are being prepared around Melbourne at the moment. Is that part of your thinking as well, how the state and the federal government can invest in these stimulus shovel-ready projects, as you say?
Yeah, look, I think it's an important space. We have, as part of our work on planning reform, looked at that dynamic around cities and the future of cities, and the opportunities for governance reform. Look, I think they're bigger ticket issues than some of our immediate focus. So we have been very much focused on what can be stimulated now and how do we get the economy moving and growing in the short term. So that has very much looked at matters that don't require legislative change. So if you think, for instance, last week, and many of your viewers will have, last year, many of your viewers would have participated in the review that was undertaken by Anna Cronin, the Better Regulation Commissioner. And we've been very, I think, impressed by the work that was done there, the level of engagement that Anna undertook, and the opportunities there, most of which don't require legislative change. And we've consulted broadly, including within government, on the opportunities there that can be effectively put in place without the need for legislative change, which obviously delays impact. But I think definitely that discussion around governance, the role of the federal, state and local government, and whether there are different opportunities perhaps along arterial roads or around particular development areas like the middle ring. Are there different ways of thinking about, say, regional strategic planning that we haven't looked at yet?
Yeah, and noting the state takes a precinct approach to a lot of that planning at the moment too. That's important.
Absolutely.
Content. Thanks for that. So you've got a 3-month, I think, remit at the moment to present some recommendations back to the state. Am I right? So
yes,
that's going to go pretty quickly. How confident are you that you'll be able to really deliver some meaningful recommendations that can be implemented quickly?
Yeah, very confident. Look, the way that the government has structured it, and certainly we've had very generous support from the Treasurer and the Minister and their officers, is that we are engaging with them regularly. So the idea was to create a very agile, dynamic process in which we would consult, and we've been doing that consultation over the last 5 weeks or so, with some intensity and some momentum. So working groups, a steering committee, separate submission processes, as well as some of the work and consultation that had been done previously. All of that has been digested. And we've been meeting weekly with the Minister and the Treasurer in order to test our views. So what are we hearing? What are some of the industry insights? What are some of the suggestions that we might work up into firmer recommendations? We've done a suite of discussion papers for the Treasurer and the Minister around some of those things that I mentioned. So stimulus, then around precincts, around planning, and some of those matters in our terms of reference. And the idea is that that will then be consolidated in coming weeks into an interim report.
Excellent. And all done in a virtual environment, I assume. It's
absolutely. We've inducted a team, a fast-track team virtually, although I know Roger and Jude both, we haven't met physically at all in the time that we've been working. Yeah. And I can tell you that it hasn't impacted on our efficiency either.
It's probably made everything more efficient, really, when you think about it.
I have heard that many people are saying they're working harder. It certainly, I think, it requires much more focus and intensity, I think, meeting on Zoom than in person.
Stan, if we can just touch briefly before I let you go on Solar Victoria, how that's been impacted by COVID-19, and has the work plan, the focus changed somewhat from your perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Chris. So just as I started working from home on the 23rd of March, and I think within that week, and obviously the health directions that were made in that week towards the end of March, we moved our entire contact centre to work from home. So that's about 50 staff. And I think often there's a discussion around people's ability to work from home and flexible workplaces. And, you know, there are some people for which generally the assumption was you can't work from home because of all of the other systems requirements, etc. But we've done that successfully. I know many organisations across government have done that. And we've been able to do that while maintaining continuity of service, which is very important to us. I'm very grateful to the team and proud of what they've achieved in that time. It's interesting because I think people were tipping that solar would drop off entirely, that there wouldn't be demand, and we just haven't seen that. We have seen a slight dip, but certainly installation numbers are continuing. And indeed, I think March was a record month. Last March was a record month with more than 6,000 installations in Victoria. And this year we exceeded that in March. There's some seasonality in April. Installations are going strong. I think applications have come down by about 15 or 20%, but they move around a bit. But we are seeing strong interest, which is really interesting to me. And Solar Victoria has now supported 80,000 Victorians to install solar over the last 18 months.
That's extraordinary. Stan, that's probably all the time we have for. Really have enjoyed chatting with you, and I look forward to hearing about what comes out the other end of the Taskforce process, and open invitation to come back and chat to us about that at the appropriate time.
Oh, I'd be delighted to. Thanks so much for your time, Chris.
Stan Krpan with us from the Building Victoria's Recovery Taskforce, I think is the correct name. Also, as normally the CEO of Solar Victoria, joining us on VLGA Connect. Thanks for joining us again today on VLGA Connect. And if you'd like to share a story with us or have a suggestion for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. All you have to do is send us an email to vlga@vlga.org.au. See you again soon on VLGA Connect.